Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I'm really excited to be doing this. This is actually, Nick and I have been working together on his piece for, I mean, it feels like years now, but this is like actually our first time meeting, seeing each other in person. So that's very exciting too. So I guess before we jump into the sort of conversation, I kind of just want to give a little bit of an overview of what the book is. Here's what it looks like. The World We Need. It's basically, I think of it as like a tour through some of the grassroots groups and movements that are tackling environmental and climate issues today, you know, often in conjunction with other issues that are usually thought of as separate. So like racial justice, prisons, community development, or gentrification. I know I was just listed as an author, but I'm actually the editor of this book because it's an anthology with it's more than 40 chapters, and it includes you know, stories reported by a lot of talented journalists from all across the country. It includes things like interviews and group interviews as well with, you know, activists, organizers, thinkers within this movement. It includes like galleries of artwork from within the movement. And I sort of think of the whole as like a tapestry of stories of how environmental campaigns and groups sort of grew out of the lives and experiences of ordinary people. So I began working on the book in 2018 when the climate crisis had, you know, started to be taken seriously as a mainstream issue, like a really pressing issue. But at the time, climate change still really felt like this massive, like daunting, systems-wide problem that would require us to change like literally everything about our lives and society. And to be fair, it still feels a little bit that way today. But, you know, at the time, the Green New Deal had been introduced, like the phrase was sort of bouncing around, and it had been introduced as a broad set of proposals, policy proposals for doing this. But, you know, it was this abstract program. You know, I talked to a lot of people who supported it in theory, but actually had like some trouble envisioning it, like what it actually was. The idea of a just transition had also been sort of batted around. What it is like a shift. It means like a shift away from the fossil fuel based extractive economy and toward a more fair, equitable, sustainable, regenerative economy. But again, it's still sounded like kind of an abstract idea, like what would that actually mean? And so the book's intention from the very beginning was to provide this vision, like a patchwork vision of, you know, the different small groups or activists or thinkers that have, you know, some of them for many, many decades now, they've been like chipping away at the big overarching question that we now face as a country, or, you know, even as a civilization, which is, you know, how do we transform our society in a way that not only shifts us away from the, you know, carbon intensive fossil fuel economy, along with, you know, the kinds of developments like agricultural practices or the kinds of human relationships that have sort of like gotten us into this mess, but how do we also move toward a society that is like more equitable, more humane? So a lot of the groups that are in this book, they have not only been fighting corporations and industries that have been like polluting the air and water in their neighborhoods or their towns across the country. Like those are what we think of as, you know, classic environmental issues. But a lot of these groups were also working toward, you know, a more positive or holistic vision of a society that's not just low carbon and clean, but, you know, it's also equitable and regenerative. It's basically their version of a small local version of a just transition. So I mentioned that like these tapestry of these stories of the environmental movement, they consist of, you know, reported stories, there's interviews, there's artwork. It also includes a few personal essays from people who like lived, work, and grew up in these environments that, you know, have been threatened by environmental or climate devastation, or are still being threatened by climate devastation. And that, that includes Nick's essay. It includes an essay by a woman who wonders if her thyroid cancer was, a result of years of, eating fruit off of trees in Vieques in Puerto Rico, which was, a US military bombing site for a long time and is still very heavily polluted from that. It includes an essay by a young Mexican-American journalist in Washington State, whose grandparents were migrant farm workers, and she and her parents have worked at big farms. They've all worked on this like one same berry farm, Sakuma Brothers Farm, that supplies, that at least used to supply Driscoll's with berries. And she sort of reflects on how farm work is intensely connected with the environment. So, you're working outside and exposed to the elements, and that's, becoming increasingly more hazardous and difficult as our climate changes. I'm sure everybody has heard about and worried about the fires that seem to, be raging intensely every single summer in that area. And then, of course, there's Nick's essay, which I want to delve into, where, Nick reflects on being a third generation coal miner. And so before we sort of like dive into that, I just want to read one little passage from Elizabeth's essay. Elizabeth is the Mexican-American journalist from Washington State, to sort of give you like maybe a broader understanding of some of the kinds of connections, the different connections that we're trying to draw in this book. So this passage is, she's reflecting on Sakuma Brothers, this farm where her parents and grandparents work. They actually had this program that employed teenagers at the time to work there during the summer. And it's just a short passage of her describing it. So here it is. One of my most vivid memories from those 3 weeks was of the one day that it rained. The morning had started dry enough, but by 11 a.m. it was pouring. Our supervisor said it would pass within minutes and told us to keep picking, but it didn't. The rain made the job extremely tedious. With all the extra moisture, if you pulled on a berry with even the slightest amount of pressure, there's a good chance it'll burst in your hand, destroying it. Many kids started calling the parents to come pick them up, but I didn't have a cell phone. So I just gave up and sat in a pile of mud, my clothes soaked with rain, until my mom picked me up. On our drive home, we passed the strawberry fields where the adults worked, and I noticed that no one was calling anyone to pick them up. Their heads were down and they were still working as quickly as they could. I knew that the longer it rained, the harder it got to pick the berries without crushing them. So it might seem like, issues of labor organizing or immigration have like nothing to do with climate and the environment. But one of the themes that runs through this book and, comes out in both, I think, Elizabeth and Nick's essay, is that, our work environments, our home environments, our neighborhood environments where we take our kids to play, or where we ourselves go to play, the places where we go for environment, those are all part of the environment more generally. And when you have, big industrial developments, whether that's a mine or like giant industrial farms, it doesn't just impact the people who live near the mine or the farm who drink the water. It also impacts the people who work there when they're working there, who also drink the water and live there, like probably somewhere close to the mine. So the labor issues are all connected to the environment, and environmental issues are also all a part of labor struggles. So, I'm in New York City. It's very easy for somebody who lives here to just like oppose coal mining because of its environmental damage. Like most people in the city have never seen a coal mine or know very much about what that work entails. And it's happening far away from where I live. But, it's for somebody who grew up there and lives there, it's much more of a complex and difficult, complex issue. So, okay, I want to finally turn this over to Nick. Your essay is, it draws from a lot of personal experience and like observations of having grown up in the coal mining family and community. So can you kind of start it by like telling us about your family and your relationship to coal mining and just how you wound up there?
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. And yeah, I'm an Appalachian storyteller, so I can be long-winded. Cut me off anytime you think it's necessary. But oh gosh, yeah. So I grew up in a little valley or hollow called Lower Georges Fork Hollow. Most of my family, a lot of my family lives up and down through here. It's been our home for generations now. I think we moved up, or some of my family moved up out of Western North Carolina in 1829, and they had been there since the mid 18th century, or perhaps earlier. So, our roots run really deep here. For the most part, my family was subsistence farmers, what they could get off the land, off the mountains, raising a little bit of livestock. But once the coal industry and timber industry came in, they switched us over to a more economic way of life. Um, my great great grandfather was one of the first to go into the coal mines, um, kind of piecing and parting together a little bit of a life as he, an income as he still lived off the land. My great grandfather worked in the mines, pretty much a career coal miner. Passed away of black lung in 1986. Um, and then, of course, both my grandfathers, as well as my father, were coal miners. So it's been in the area for a long time. And they were union miners as well, which was really important, and had really strong wives. My grandmothers, we can't leave them out. They were uh, they were the ones who kept the house running and kept everything going, and supported everything that the union did for to try to get the labor rights that we so needed in this area. But I grew up with a lot of cousins, a lot of family that just stayed around the region because this is home. This is where life has been for us.
So you mentioned the union, and you actually open your essay with a very vivid memory of a labor strike that seems to have left a very big impression on you. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, yeah. It was 1989. Um, I think it was April of 1989. Piston Coal Company, which had taken over Clinchfield, one of the larger miners and mining companies in southwestern Virginia. They were negotiating a new contract with the union, and in the process, they eliminated the health care benefits for the pensioners. So all of a sudden, the widows of fallen miners, the disabled miners, who, some being quadriplegic, some being paraplegic, having debilitating back injuries, and of course, the retirees who had spent all their life working in the mines lost their health care. And this went on for a year. So after reaching impasse after impasse, the miners finally walked out, including several cousins and uncles. Um, my father was working in a separate complex for a different company in Kentucky at the time, but they eventually came out on strike as well in support of the Pittston strikers. So it was a 9-month strike. I remember seeing just so much community, uh, seeing everybody come together to rallies, to pickets, to support each other, taking food to strike shacks as people posted, to try to prevent the flow of coal and to try to get Pittston to uphold the agreements that they had promised. So it was a really, really formative time in my life because I was able to see right then that there was definitely a lot to be said about corporate greed and the and how it can affect families and entire regions of communities. So it was, to say it deeply impacted me, it would be pretty accurate.
How did the strike turn out?
Well, after 9 months, they finally agreed upon a contract. The contract was negotiated in private. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it might have occurred in Canada, well away from the rank and file. A lot of the miners did not like the contract. They felt that it was watered down, that the UMWA was rushing to get everybody back to work, but they reluctantly signed it because people were needing the money. Strike pay was non-existent for some union miners, unfortunately. I think I had an uncle who didn't even draw the first dime of strike pay, and so everybody was weathering hard times. Uh, and but unfortunately, a few years after that, if not just a couple, there was a downturn in the coal markets, and Pittston used the opportunity to shut down all their union operations, as well as Westmoreland and other major operations. So my father, uncles, many union miners found themselves without a job and desperately seeking any sort of income to make ends meet and take care of their families.
So when you were growing up, did you think you were going to wind up as a miner? Did you want to?
Oh, absolutely not. My grandfathers, my father, my mother, everybody, nobody wanted us kids to end up in the coal mines. I mean, they loved mining, especially in union mines. It was like a family. There was a camaraderie there. They enjoyed the work, and because there was a lot better safety and there was a lot less push for production. But even still, they knew that it come with health risks. It came with the potential for explosions, for any sort of number of disasters or ways to get killed. We've lost family members in the mines, and so they wanted us to go on and do better. There's an old Gene Ritchie song, "The L&Ns Don't Stop Here Anymore," and it's son, go learn your letters so you don't become a dirty old coal miner like me. And that was very much the way it was in this family. But the economic desperation in this area is so much that you just end up having to do what you have to do to make ends meet.
Actually, the essay that I just read from Elizabeth Alvarado, the title of it is a quote from her piece, and it's called "You Don't Want to End Up in the Fields Like Me." I mean, her parents were proud of the work that they did, also, but yeah, it's dangerous and difficult and low paying, and that's what they always told her as an enticement to like get her to do her homework or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah. So how did you wind up with that
Well,
job?
I did everything I could to try to avoid it. Let's see, I moved away from the area to begin with, chasing a dream, to be a firefighter, and connected up with some folks in Indiana. Uh, but that eventually fell through, just because the living situation wasn't quite the best. Just a 17-year-old with a coalfield high school education, I wasn't able to find many jobs up there that I could work while I was waiting on training and stuff. So winters get cold up there, and the place we were living in wasn't that insulated. So, but moved back, tried Knoxville, Tennessee, hoping to avoid the region and the mono economy of coal. That didn't work out. Again, I put in so many applications. I was pretty good with computers, but I didn't have the certifications, and they're not offered in this area very much. So I just found that as a Air Force recruiter told my brother, it's like whenever we're looking at people that come from, say, the Tri-Cities in East Tennessee versus a coal miner that got his diploma from, or a coal miner's kid that's got his diploma from Clintwood High School, it's like hands down we're going to know the kid from Dobbins Bennett's got a lot better credentials and education, and that's the people we're going to promote up to the more important positions. And that seemed to be the case in evidence whenever I went out looking for jobs. Just that high school diploma from a coalfield school, underfunded, was not enough to get us anywhere. So I did eventually land a pretty decent economic development job. I mentioned it in the chapter. Um, in this region, while there was the bust in the coal markets, there was a push to try to bring in job alternatives, and most of it came in the form of prisons, Others were, call centers, usually opportunistic, looking for cheap labor. So I did that for a while, but it just was not a career job. Didn't provide the retirement benefits. We were living paycheck to paycheck even after I'd been promoted twice and was a supervisor. So, uh, after I had exhausted all other possibilities, looking at getting jobs with the railroads, to utility companies that are long-term jobs with good retirement and good pay, there's a lot of nepotism involved in those. So it looked like the coal mines for me, and I had to talk myself into it. And I really bought myself into the pride of being a coal miner like my father was, to try to shirk any feelings of failure for having not been able to escape it.
You mentioned the mono economy of coal in the area where you're from. What does that mean? What did that look like to you?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, whenever you look at urbanization or economic development in a lot of places in the nation, usually you have various industries coming in, and you have a diversity of job types. You have a lot of opportunities for different skilled trade jobs that offer a pretty good living wage. But in Appalachia, especially in the central coal fields, where where a lot of people had come in and exploited the people and purchased their mineral rights or extorted them from them, the whole development was around an extraction industry. At first, it was the timber extraction industry, and then it became coal. So the coal industry owned a majority of the mineral rights in the region beneath the surface. They also owned a large portion of surface um, rights. So they were able to kind of keep other industries out and just keep the industry purely focused on coal. And what industries did pop up were in support of it. Supply industries, especially electrical industries for the equipment and things like that. But that was really it. And so, service industry jobs, of course, coal miners and their families would buy from local stores and things. But that was it. It was really just kind of service industry jobs, supply industry jobs, and mining. And so, whenever anything happened with the mining industry, we just went into, it was just economically devastating for everybody in the region.
um, yeah, there is a difference also between like right now when, a lot of employers are talking about why can't we hire people? We have jobs. And it's clear now there's a very big difference between like jobs and then good jobs. And it sounds from the essay, your chapter, that when you went into the coal industry finally, it was a good job. Like it offered a lot of things that, the low paying jobs didn't. So could you, describe that and just describe.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had worked at Crutchfield in the call center as a technical support supervisor for 7 years, or well, 4 years as a supervisor, but a total of 7 there. Uh, couldn't contribute to my 401k, so only got like $7,000 in it after 7 years. That math just did not compute for a long-term retirement plan, even if you added on any kind of interest or gains in the stock market. So yeah, whenever I started working in the mines, I was being paid an extra 20-30,000 on the year. Benefits were amazing. I mean, they had excellent profit sharing, 401k matching. I was able to surpass that $7,000 mark within a year or two. Not to mention the healthcare benefits. Premiums were steadily increasing where I had worked, and taking up a larger and larger chunks of our monthly income. So the mines, the coal companies would actually offer premium-free insurance that was 90/10 coverage, just no deductibles. So the healthcare that they afforded people was extremely important, and very important for other friends of mine too, who had family that had very debilitating illnesses.
Could you actually tell us about the work and what the job entailed? I think a lot of people, when they think of coal mining, they think about it from like 150 years ago, dust covered workers in mine shafts with like headlamps and pickaxes, but that's like obviously not the case anymore. So
Yeah.
what did it consist of, and what are the new dangers? What are the things that you have to deal with?
Well, let's see. A lot of people, whenever they think about a coal mine, they think everything is just black and pitch black, but it's actually quite the opposite. Everything is white. We apply ample amounts of rock dust, which is limestone powder, to the walls and ceiling and bottom of the mine to prevent uh, coal dust from being able to get into the air and explode, which is the primary force of your major ignitions and disasters for explosions. So that's the first thing, is it's actually a little bit lighter in there than what you would expect. The temperature is constant at about 65 degrees, so you don't have to worry about working out in the weather so much. Shifts were usually run 10 hours, and we did rotating shifts. You would be working usually 5 or 6 days on a day shift, which would have you or you had to be underground at 6 a.m. in the morning, and you got out of the portal at 4 p.m. And then the next week, after your days off, you would have to switch yourself around to being able to go in and be underground at 3 p.m. and you would get off at 1 a.m. So within just a couple of weeks time there, you've had to adjust your body back and forth from being able to get up and be to a mine, get up at 4:30 in the morning and be ready to go at 6 a.m. To having to stay awake and work until 1 a.m. So you were always fatigued. It was miserable work a lot of the time. The push for production. They had miners competing with each other. At the end of every shift, we had to tell how many roof bolts we put in the mine to support the top. So there were no rock falls or roof falls, collapses. And it was, people competed because they wanted to make sure that they had as many bolts as the next crew, so that if there was performance-based layoffs, they didn't have to worry about gaining a pink slip. And the companies often threaten those in memos. So the coal industry is looking kind of bad right now. We might have to idle the mine, and if we lay people off, it'll be based on people's performance. So in terms of dangers, today a lot of the easier coal seams to get to have been mined out. The ones that were kind of right directly into the hillsides, where you could just scrape off a little bit of the hillside and start a mine. And a lot of times there's not as much natural gas in those seams, but the deeper seams that they're now able to go for and that have become more economical to mine through mechanization are often under the water table. So there's a lot more methane gas. The mine that I was working for, we liberated 7 million cubic feet of methane gas every 24 hours. And it would peak out sometimes to 12 million if we had a low pressure system move through. And so in terms of climate change, that's something to think about as well. Some of these mines themselves produce enormous amounts of greenhouse gases. But that was a constant danger, was ignition of methane in large scale mine explosion. I was working underground whenever Upper Big Branch occurred in 2010. We've had friends and family die in explosions. So that's always there. Water inundation, flooding of the mine. We didn't have to worry about it as much, but my father did. Getting into areas of old or working or cutting into old works where there would be black damp, oxygen deficient air. So that could cause you just collapse. So these, and of course the long-term risks of silicosis from sandstone and cutting sandstone, as well as the of course black lung from coal dust. So lots of electrocution. I mean, we had 7,200 volts running into the mines. All of our equipment was electric, and had trailing cables, long extension cords that were about this big around to this big around, carrying hundreds and hundreds of volts. So dangers of electrocution, being crushed by machinery. There's just a lot of ways to get hurt or killed in the mines.
So you recount in your essay sort of trying to, or having this impulse to organize your fellow workers and talk to your fellow workers about that, but it not going that well.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, in the 90s, the coal company had shut down all of its union mines. And this was throughout Appalachia, actually. Today, Eastern Kentucky, Southwest Virginia, and I think even West Virginia don't have has zero underground coal miners who are union now. But what they did do is in their smaller mines, whenever they did still keep producing, they hired on the people who crossed the picket lines, people we like to call scabs, people who were who were very loyal to the companies, um, and loathed the union. They believed this. They had this belief that union men were lazy, that they didn't want to work that hard, and there were a few bad examples of that. Men who weren't shouldn't really have been working, but the union kept protecting them. But those were few and far between. I mean, my father was a union miner, and he was the hardest working man I've ever known. Same for my grandfathers. Um, so the sentiments in this ideology that the companies had put forth in this generational change of coal miners from the 90s into the 2000s, they created a really anti-union sentiment. So um, it was a tough battle to be able to try to get a union in, but there were still people who were sympathizers and would have easily done it. But there wasn't much interest in the UMWA. You watch movies like Mate One, and you hear the tales of the organizers who went around to coal camp, risking life and limb to organize miners and help them fight for better labor rights and wages and things. And I never really saw any. In fact, I had to invite them to my house, and after I did, lo and behold, um, I got put on a terrible shift. uh, After they identified who I was, which was a current concern about from other miners. Whenever I first talked to one about possibly, an older miner who was union at one time, he says, "Yeah, just don't give me a name and number if you call the UMWA, because we have pretty good belief that they're in the back pocket of the company." Um, so really didn't get much help from them either. And even my uncle, who was a union miner and went through the Pittston strike, wasn't as and he saw some of the negativity of the union management and administration, and he wasn't too pleased with them. So it's just a really tough situation, but that's what people have.
How did you finally end up leaving coal mining?
Oh wow. um, well, I think it was the summer of 2010. I had been I got 5 days off of work to and I decided to use that to do a little bit of camping on the river in the camper, and to maybe do some home renovations at the house. It was my great grandparents' home that we had been renovating for years. Uh, and In the middle of the night, we lost it in a fire. Everything we owned, everything. They, I don't know. After that, I had I just grown up realizing how important a wage was, and to be able to earn a good wage and to be able to buy the things that you wanted, this kind of American dream happiness. And whenever I lost it all, I didn't understand you know why. So it just really got me to thinking a lot about life. My brother and some friends mentioned, it's like, hey, do you want to spend the rest of your life being a coal miner? And I really got to thinking about it. I got to thinking about the way the companies had been treating us. Um, and about a month later, after we lost the house, and I actually kind of gotten had a few moments with management, we'll say, I decided, it's just not important anymore. Risking your life for a decent wage and being away from your kids and spending all that overtime, it just wasn't important anymore. And there was better things to be had. There was something more meaningful to life.
One thing that somebody else pointed out to me, I think it was an interviewer in another interview, mentioned your piece and mentioned that when you talked about this part in your essay, you wrote, I began to truly embrace life. I quit smoking, started exercising, and began eating healthier. I also decided that it was time to start fighting the injustices of the coal industry. I attended local environmentalist meetings. So this interviewer pointed out that it was like interesting that you had started to take care of your personal health at the same time as you started focusing on the health of the environment. And he asked me if they were related, and I'm not you, so I don't know. I could only give an abstract, speculative answer, but now that you're here,
Yeah. No, I would say absolutely. I don't know. I mean, all those years I'd just kind of been mistreating my body. I'd smoked for 14 years, and I ate terribly. So I don't know. All of a sudden, just life became more important, and I remember the first shift after the fire. I went and looked at the portal as we were getting ready to go underground, and I just had this thought to myself. It's like, what in the hell am I doing? I could get killed. I could be crushed up. I could just blink of an, just blank out, and that be it. Rock fall or something. And I'd been feeling terrible too. I mean, whenever you smoke, whenever your body is constantly fatigued from the switchings of the shift or working third shift, which happened a lot, um, I just felt terrible. And then all of a sudden, it's just like there's got to be more to life. But yeah, I had never liked what they had been doing to our mountains. That's why I went to an underground mine rather than a surface mine. The mountaintop removed behind our home and destroyed it. And I began to realize that there was a lot of related things. The more I got involved with environmental activists, the more I began to realize that there were some severe negative health impacts, not just for the miner themselves, but for people living in the communities. We always joked and knew that the cancer rates around here were higher, but I just never really put a lot of thought into it as to why, just assuming it was what people were eating, but that wasn't the case.
um, so yeah, you eventually joined the environmental movement, and you became kind of like a voice within it. Um, can you just explain what it was like being being part of that movement,
Yeah,
entering into it?
yeah. It was going into it was amazing. I mean, it really felt like I'd finally found that family that I hadn't seen um, since maybe the Union days. People were very accepting. They were eager to hear what I had to say, and they wanted me to speak about the issues, and what I had seen, and why coal miners might have been the way that they were towards environmental activists, which I heard a lot underground, a lot of negative stereotypes, a lot of cursing about coal, tree huggers coming into the region and trying to shut down the coal mines. So, uh, so I wanted to help try to combat that. And it was really great to be included into something after having spent so much time in hostile work environments. So felt great to be part of something that was actually trying to make a difference and improve people's lives beyond just making rich people richer off of resources. So yeah, it was great to be involved.
Um, and but then you became disillusioned with it, right? Um, what happened?
Yeah, yeah. I remember. I think it was 2011. I had actually, after realized all the negative health impacts to the region, um, after Michael Hendricks's reports came out, that identified, coal mining as a culprit in terms of people's negative health. So we decided to move from the region, and I actually put in for a position with the Sierra Club as a Beyond Coal community organizer in Eastern Kentucky, working in coal mining communities, just across the border from where I grew up. Um, but I was turned down. And I found out later that it was because I didn't have a college degree. I did not have a bachelor's. And so they awarded the position to somebody who had a bachelor's degree. So I kind of began to understand a little bit, but at the same time, I went to college, went to go get a degree so I could hopefully be a better advocate, because that's the way it made me think. It's like, okay, well, if I'm really going to do this and be a really good environmental activist, I need to go to college and learn more. And so I did. Berea College accepted me and provided me an excellent free tuition education. But while I was there, I began to kind of notice a lot more about how that environmental activist organizations and activists themselves were saying things that weren't really doing anything to unite communities in the coal fields. By coming in with an anti-coal, shut the coal mines down, protect the mountains message, they were antagonizing mining families who were extremely dependent upon the mining industry for jobs and healthcare. So naturally, they weren't very accepting of it, and it was pushing people away. And I was like, yeah, I can really understand how that's happening. Um, Maybe we should start changing it up. But my sentiments weren't very accepted.
I think in the essay, do you use the word culture war? You kind of describe it as like a culture war. I'm wondering if you still feel that way, a couple years after you wrote it, or
Yeah.
feel it even more now.
Oh, absolutely. And I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth because a lot of the people who came, the movement started with grassroots activists. A lot of wonderful women and men in West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Southwest Virginia, who saw what was happening to their mountains and stood up and began trying to fight it. But they also needed resources. There was also publications being made about mountaintop removal nationally, so it was attracting national interest. And that brought a lot of other environmental activists into the region to help protect the mountains as these local people sought resources by going out into the world and asking for them at universities and from larger organizations. But the influx of funds and the influx of activists who never grew up in Appalachia, many of them who were college students and learned about it in trips to the region or through professors. Um, they kind of came in with a bit of a different culture than what is typically found in Appalachian communities. So a lot of that kind of grated against people. People, sometimes they look different, talk different. And this is a region that has been deeply stigmatized by outsiders from the coal industry, or what goes back to the Civil War, bushwhackers coming through the area, people, then the land agents coming through and buying up all the mineral rights and resources, the coal industry and timber industry coming in and exploiting them and exploiting our labor, and then even the war on poverty in 1965 and all the negative uh, imagery of Appalachian people as these poor inbred hillbillies and stereotypes of we got to help these people, they can't help themselves. So outside media that came in and filmed and just went to the worst of the worst places to get stuff that would bring in ratings, it all deeply stigmatized Appalachian people. So we saw it as just yet another group of outsiders coming in to try to change our way of life, and we're going to end up being harmed by it as usual. So by coming in here, and some of them, I think there was some arrogance there that just really pushed against people and made them want to do anything but join an environmental movement. In fact, sent them straight to the coal industry and got them proud to be coal miners, proud to be families of coal miners and friends of coal, also and just really hating every single bit of what they considered a liberal environmentalist culture.
So I think we're running out of time. So
Yeah.
I think we should take some questions, but before we get there, Nick, maybe I'm curious what you think that the environmental movement or politicians or organizations need to do to fix this. And yeah, do you feel hopeful about it, or?
Well, I mean, and of course, my academic studies actually went down that same track, and I've put a lot of thought into it. The reason I'm a communication strategist is because I want to be able to help people formulate messages that speak more to the working class communities, to also investigate what is going on there a little bit more, rather than just kind of coming in and saying we got to shut this down. They have to be a little bit more nuanced. And the only way to do that is by incorporating people who have the lived experience of that community, who know the people, who have lived there, who know um, what it's like to try to be able to make ends meet and not be able to have to deal with these companies, and to have, and who know maybe what their neighbors are thinking a little bit more. Those grassroots people are the ones who really know how to communicate and be persuasive and have credibility within their own communities to try to really mandate change. Unfortunately, a lot of times those grassroots activists aren't the ones being paid. It's the higher level organizers in larger nonprofit environmentalist organizations that get a lot of those resources. And so if a grassroots organizer can't do that work full time or even part time because they have to work so hard just to support themselves and their families, then they become, then we're not being effective. And sadly, uh, that allows, I think, a lot more of the outside environmentalist narrative to kind of muck things up. So I think it takes a lot of humility and a lot of understanding that these resources need to be put more towards the local people fighting these fights than the higher level organizations that are in large cities with ridiculous real estate values and high cost of living. So,
Okay. Do we have questions?
We do, thank you. And I thank you both first for the conversation, and Audrea for your wonderful introduction of the book, and sharing the reading. And Nick, thank you so much for sharing your story. So we do have a couple of questions. The first one is from Denise. And Denise asks, are there efforts to mitigate the damage of the coal mines? And if so, do they hold any promise for employment utilizing the skills of existing workers?
There is quite a few mines that have been abandoned that are still needing reclamation work. Yeah, there is a lot of mitigation work to be done, and that could very well employ a lot of miners. I mean, around me, there's a high wall that was unreclaimed because it was mined prior to 1977 in the SMACRA, or the Surface Mine Control and Reclamation Act. So definitely, there are opportunities for that. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to completely fix everything because a lot of the damage, especially to the underlying hydrology, is irreparable. Once the acidic mine drainage starts, it's really difficult to prevent that, especially in the deeper underground mines that have been collapsed. But there is a lot of work that can be done to try to fix what impacts that those outflows can have on creeks. So yeah, I think that certainly with enough funding, um, especially too, since a lot of these companies have a habit of filing bankruptcy and getting out of some of these bonds and things.
So is that where we are at this point in terms of mitigating the environmental effects? Is it down to the companies that cause them to decide to do the right thing and pay for them, or are there any other sort of processes at work to perform these mitigation efforts that you're talking about?
There is some, I think each individual state receives some funding from the Abandoned Mine Lands Fund to be able to do some of this work, but it's not on any major scales. And yeah, pretty much coal companies, depending on how the methods that they use to bond, they're supposed to put up the money initially to be able to, or that if they were to fail, then there would be enough money put aside so that could be then handed over to another company to then come in and do the reclamation work. However, a lot of times the companies, work with politicians and get loopholes in some of these laws that allow them to, post bond, or, not necessarily post the full bond amount because they have a high credit rating, which is like what happened in Wyoming with Alpha Natural Resources. So there's a lot of ways that they can slink out of it through bankruptcy and various loopholes in federal law that they can get away high and dry, and leave really no money to do these reclamation efforts.
Well, that doesn't sound particularly hopeful, but thank you so much for answering the question, because it's Denise was asking, what sort of are there efforts to mitigate, and it sounds like there are, but those efforts are nowhere near meeting the task at hand in terms of how many coal mines still exist and are still poisoning the water and the earth, right? That's the impression. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And then this next question is from Anne, and it's for both of you, really, but directed. I'll direct it to you, Audrea. But Nick, you'll have an opportunity to speak this as well. Audrea, how did you first connect with Nick to ask him to contribute a piece to the book? And were you familiar with his story already?
Well, yes, I was familiar with it because he wrote a blog. I'm not sure if you still write it, called The Thoughtful Coal Miner, which told some parts of that story. And you had also written a piece sort of building off of that in the New York Times. So yeah, I reached out to Nick, and yeah, Nick, do you still actively keep the blog up?
Oh, it's there. I changed the title to Thoughts of a Coal Miner, as well as the link on it, but I haven't contributed. It's been very sporadic, as I've gone to grad school and done other things, trying to survive COVID and the economy. Things don't really go terribly well in those directions sometimes. So I do occasionally get on there and try to post something. But I also find myself repeating myself a lot about the same things. So that gets a little frustrating, because those problems are still there. They're still pertinent. And it's frustrating. So yeah, it's there. We'll put it that way.
And Nick, when Audrea approached you about being part of the book, how did that go? What was your response and your thinking, and about what you just eventually decided to contribute to the book?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, whenever I get, I've gotten other, opportunities to write and requests to write op-eds and things like that. Sometimes they haven't gone really well, or I've been requested, people have requested that I, help point them in the right direction for other people, because they have a narrative or a framing in mind that they want to go with, or they just outright hear what I have to say and then use that to write their own article, and so there's actually some unfortunate exploitation that can happen in that area. People will come to the region looking for a good story, and they'll get people's stories, and then they'll just take them, print them, excel their careers, and then they're off. And then the people are left in the bad situation that they began in. So I was apprehensive, as I usually was. But Audrea, after talking with her and getting an understanding of what she was wanting to achieve in the book, that she wasn't necessarily going to be protective of a lot of the larger environmental greens, that she was kind of sympathetic to some of the issues that were happening amongst grassroots organizers. She very well convinced me that this would be an excellent book, and I'm very pleased with it. So
that's great. Thank you. So we're at 7 o'clock. I do want to take one moment. We mentioned backstage earlier that if you have a book recommendation for the folks who are with us this evening, or might catch the video later, if you would like to share those with us now, and it can be on this topic or not. Most of the people who join us read widely, but if there's something that you would like to recommend for folks, we'd love to hear it. Nick, do you have something? Audrey, it looks like you have thinking face, I feel like. So
Suddenly blanking.
I'm sorry, I get that. Yeah, it's the whole. Nick, do you have something? Well,
Yeah, I'd like to throw out Jonathan Smucker's Hegemony How To, a roadmap for radicals. He kind of looks at the Occupy movement and really deep delves into some of those communication issues that I was talking about that occurred here in the mountains with that. And I think it helps people really kind of think about the larger power dynamics and power structures involved and how that they really have to consider how they approach any kind of activism and the general public to be able to gain interest and change attitudes. So
Hegemony How To was the title.
yes.
Thank you. Your turn, Audrea, but no pressure. I know this is all very strange.
I guess I can tell you the book that I was reading earlier today that has to do with the project I'm working on. It's Winona LaDuke's All Our Relations. And it talks about different, I don't know, it sort of like spotlights a few different Native communities who have initiated, a bunch of different like environmental campaigns or have tried to build community economic development projects, land-based economic development projects around it that combine a lot of different things that come up in the book. So like the environment, ways of providing meaningful jobs, healthy food, fighting for Native sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, and cultural power. And yeah, it's a bunch of different, I guess they're like case studies or it just spotlights a bunch of these different examples, including her own efforts on the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota. So it's like a wealth of stories and information and ideas. So
amazing. That's an amazing recommendation. Oh, Nick has another one.
I got actually two more.
Two more. Okay.
Written in Blood by Wes Harris. It details a lot of the history of coal mining and union activism in the region, and even some of the real negative aspects of coal mine towns. Specifically Esau, which was a system of company scrip where women of fallen miners would unfortunately have to sell their bodies to be able to make ends meet for their own family within the company town. So there's a wealth of wonderful and unfortunate information in that book. And I'd also like to throw out there Fighting King Coal by Dr. Shannon Bell, which kind of takes a deeper delve into how the coal industry mobilized their public relations to be able to counteract environmental activism and to build a more solid cultural identity and socioeconomic identity around coal to make them to help the companies in this fight. So those are a couple more.
Excellent, thank you. Audrea, just in case another one occurred to you, if you want to balance things out, we're happy to hear it.
Good.
All good. Okay. So on that note, I just want to thank you both for being with us this evening, for talking to us about the world we need, for the work you are both doing to shed light on grassroots environmental activism and broaden the way we look at this whole topic and what environmental activists look like and what they're doing and what things can be done to move the needle on this issue and to also create more justice and equity in the world in general. So appreciate the work you're doing and thank you so much. I'll give you both the space to share some final words with us before we say goodnight to the audience. Start with you, Audrea.
Oh, I just want to say thank you all for joining us. And I hope you read the book. It, we live in some dark times, and just watching the way these like COP26 talks are going, it's, not that inspiring. But I found working with all these different authors and like on the book, The World We Need. I came away with it really hopeful, even with essays like Nick's, which have a lot of important but like very real critiques of some of the things that we're doing wrong. But I even find, you know, I found stuff to be hopeful about in his essay too. So.
That's great. A little hope. That's excellent. Thank you. And Nick?
Yeah, excellent points. And thank you all again for having us and giving us this time and space. And thank you, Audrea, for giving me the space to be able to write an essay. So get to tell you that, you know, in person, sort of. But yeah, no, it can be very hard and depressing work, but there is a lot of hope out there. There is still the ability to kind of push beyond this. And I've seen the same things that's occurred in Appalachia occur in other grassroots movements, other environmental movements across the nation. And it seems to work back to that same environment, jobs versus environment dichotomy, that blue-green divide. So I think it behooves us all as environmental activists to stop and take note. We have to be able to be critical of ourselves, because I can guarantee you the industries are. Public relations work and marketing work is all about researching who you're talking to so you don't make the wrong statements and create enemies. So we have to really think about some of the tactics that they use and employ on themselves, even if it seems grimy, because we have to be able to reach other people and change attitudes before we're going to make any major difference in this fight.
Thank you, both of you. Again, Audrea Lim, Nick Mullins, and the book is The World We Need. We encourage you to pick up a copy from Malaprop's or another local independent bookseller. Thank you all again so much for joining us. We hope to see you again in another event, and please stay safe and well in the meantime, and good night.